Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
It's week 3 of Happy, where we're talking about some habits of happy people and looking through the book of Philippians, which is a letter in the New Testament that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi. And he wrote Philippians from prison in Rome, which we'll talk about some today. And it just so happens to be basically the happiest book in the Bible. The word happy or joy or rejoice, some form of the word shows up 17 times in that short book. And so we're looking through the story that Paul writes to and pulling out some nuggets about happiness and some habits that we could all learn from. And today we're going to talk about something I'm calling when and then thinking. When and then thinking. It goes kind of like this. When I get here, then I will be happy. Or when I get to college, then I will be happy. Or when I finally graduate from college, then I will be happy. When and then thinking. A lot of us have it. When I get that new job, then I'll be happy. If I could just get my old job back, then I could be happy. When I finally am able to have kids, then I will be happy. Or when my kids finally leave home, then I will be happy. I'll have some money to do stuff with. When I get on vacation, when I can get through this traffic, etc., etc. When I get married, then I will be happy. When and then thinking, which is a false notion that many people have. Because as Pastor Matt mentioned last week, happiness is a choice. Happiness is not something you find one day. It's a choice. It's a decision that we make. And we can't blame our happiness or lack of happiness on anyone but ourselves. And you don't go looking for happiness. You don't make it a goal in your life. It's a byproduct of right thinking and right decisions and right acting. And so we're going to start here today by talking about 4 happy bandits. 4 things that can steal your happiness if you let it. 4 quick things, and then we're going to go through, as we go through the story in Philippians today, we'll come back to all 4 of these, and you'll see how Paul dealt with each and every one. The first happy bandit that we'll talk about today is pain. Pain. It's hard to be happy when you are in pain. If you ever pull a hamstring, it hurts, and you're not happy in the moment that you pull the hammy. If you ever stub your toe, it hurts and it's painful. You get up, in the middle of the night, like some do, to go get a glass of water, and furniture has moved. Furniture, it's strange how it does that. It just shifts just enough in the night for you to stub your toe, and you hit it, and you're not happy. Pain can cause us to not be happy. Picky people in general, as a matter of fact, can be happy bandits. People in general, people who are arrogant, people who are irritating, people in general can steal your joy if you let them. Pressure situations, be it internal or external. When we're under pressure, sometimes we can lose our joy. We were trying to get back into the city yesterday from our trip, and we made great time getting back to the city because I had 4 baseball games to attend yesterday between my 2 boys, and they started at about 10 after 1, so we drove all the way from Houston, and we're getting into town. We're making this great time, and I don't know if any of you traveled 1604 coming west yesterday. I don't know if you know of a truck that was overturned, and apparently 1604 was shut down for hours and hours. Well, we drove right into that, oblivious off of we had a little getaway, my wife and I, and we're driving back into town all footloose and fancy free, and suddenly pressure. pressure hits. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to make my kids' game. Luckily, I was able to get through the traffic and make my kids' game. But it's amazing how pressure situations can jump on you quick and can rob you of your happiness. Problems are the fourth. Just problems, any sort of problems. Just problems in general. Marriage problems, relationship problems, boy, girl, dating, college problems, school problems, job situations, career problems. Problems can steal you of your joy. So Paul kind of talks through and winds up dealing with all four of these in this next passage that we are about to pick up. And he addresses these happy bandits. And Paul has not had a run of good luck when he writes this book, Philippians. When he writes this that we're about to read, he's not had a good run of luck. It's been a bad 4 years for him. Starting with 2 years imprisonment in Caesarea on false charges, no less. And then he's sent to Rome, essentially as a prisoner. And as he's en route to Rome on a ship, the ship is shipwrecked, and they wind up on a deserted Mediterranean island where, while spending time on that island, he gets bit by a poisonous snake. Things are not going well. Then they finally make it on to Rome, where he is imprisoned for another 2 years, and he's such an important prisoner, a royal prisoner, if you will, that he has a guard chained to him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A guard chained him. And I'm not talking about like a Barney Fife type, where's my bullet, type guard. I'm talking about this was a Praetorian guard. So essentially, you think he was like an elite soldier, think Navy SEAL, attached to Paul 24 hours a day. And so here he is. It's been a miserable run for him. It's been a bad 4 years. And he sits down and puts pen to paper, and with God anointing him, he writes the happiest book in the Bible, helping us to see from the very beginning, early on in this book, that happiness is not based on circumstances. Happiness is a choice that you make. It's not based on happenings. Your happiness can't be based on happenings. If your happiness is based on happenings, then you're going to live a pretty miserable life with a few highlights here and there. Those few days on vacation before you got tired of whoever you were on vacation with. The one time you did win a little bit of money. The first day of your new job. The highlight. If your happiness is based on happenings, you're going to wind up living a pretty miserable life. Paul should not be happy, but alas, he writes this happy book. And so we're going to talk about this subject today, how to be happy no matter what. And we're going to look at 4 things from this passage addressing these 4 happy bandits. How to be happy no matter what. Now, when I was a kid in church, I grew up in a traditional Southern church, Deep South, and Mississippi. And I don't know if any of you grew up Deep South religious background, be it Southern Baptist, Southern Methodist, Southern Pentecostal. I came from a Pentecostal background, and there was a little song that we would get to singing sometimes in church. We sang a lot in church growing up, but one of the songs that we sang was. Maybe you've never heard this. Maybe this was just our church. But it went like this. The joy of the Lord is my strength. 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 Anybody ever heard that song before? Okay, not many of you. I didn't figure a handful of you. Yeah, they sang it at my church. There was one verse that said it got weirder as the song progressed. One song said, the devil doesn't like it. Ha, 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 ha. The devil doesn't like it. Ha, 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 ha. And I can just imagine, first-timers, this is a church here. We heard about this church. Get to looking around. They're singing a song that says ha, 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 ha in the song. But it got even weirder because by the time you got toward the end of the song, the verse was just this. One of the verses was ha, 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 ha. And I can just imagine someone looking around thinking, these are some deranged, psychotic, lunatic church people. And maybe there probably were a few that were deranged and psychotic. But that was my growing up. So we're talking about joy and being happy. And I'm not talking about some emotional, worked up, fake, manufactured happiness. I'm talking about some genuine habits that Paul kind of models for us in this passage that we can live out in our own lives just by being intentional and just by making some good decisions. So I want to dive off into it the first day. Paul models these 4 habits, and the first one we're going to look at is simply this. I can be happy no matter what if I look at every problem from God's viewpoint. If I look at every problem from God's viewpoint. Happy people, happy and peaceful people who live their life full of joy tend to have a large perspective. They see the big picture. And I want to pick up Paul's letter here. We'll start here in Philippians chapter 1, still in the first chapter, Philippians 1, verse number 12, where Paul says this is New Living Translation. He says, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me, everybody say everything. Everything that has happened to me has helped to spread the good news. Everything that has happened, everything. The good stuff, the bad stuff, imprisoned on false charges, shipwrecked, snake bitten. Now I'm sitting here chained to a Praetorian guard, a Navy SEAL, basically, the best of the best, the elite. And I have no idea what awaits me. I assume death awaits me from persecution. But everything that has happened to me has helped to spread the good news. So here's the truth that we draw from this passage. No matter what is happening in your life, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the ugly stuff, God has this amazing ability to turn it around and work it for our good as well as the good of the kingdom. I've told you this before, but as I look back over my life, I'm 41 years old. I have a few years behind me now. Hopefully I have a lot more ahead of me than I do behind me. But as I look back over my life, the things that happened to me, some of the challenges that I dealt with as a child and as a teenager, and as I got older and went to college, and some of the barriers that I ran up against, and then even I got into ministry, and good things happened, some bad things happened, some downright ugly things have happened to me in my life. And yet, as I look back over each and every experience, I see how God stacked every experience on top of one another to create something beautiful out of my life, to create something amazing, something significant, something that would allow me to be able to even stand here before you this morning and preach about having happiness in every situation. God has this amazing ability to take your story and put it together. I'm not saying that He causes bad things to happen to you, but He takes the good and the bad and the ugly, and He turns it around and He works it for your good. Someone told me a couple of weeks ago that they had an experience whenever they were in their early 20s. They had a bad car accident, and it changed the course of their life. Over about a year and a half, they wound up getting a settlement, and the settlement allowed them to get out of a bad living situation and get their life back on track to be kind of self-supportive and move back into a closer relationship with God. And now they look back and they realize that car accident, that you would think that's not a good thing that would happen to somebody, but God used it to help pull them out of a bad situation and get their life literally on track. God's good at doing those sorts of things. We don't tend to see our problems. We don't tend to see anything the way God sees them. See, Paul had this dream to go preach in Rome, where he's currently in prison when he wrote this. He had a dream to preach in Rome, and because Rome was the most strategic place in the world at that time, there was no greater empire, no city more powerful. So he wanted to go to Rome. He wanted to rent the Colosseum, and man, he wanted to have a Billy Graham crusade. Where he would just preach to thousands. He had this dream to go and preach, but God had a completely different idea about how Paul was going to preach and reach people in Rome. It was not nearly as glamorous as Paul's was. Not nearly so glamorous. Because, see, here's the thing. Nero was Caesar at this point, and if you know anything about Nero, he was a wicked, crazy man. He took Christians and tossed them to lions for sport. People would gather and cheer as they heard skulls crushed by the lions. Yay! Woo! Crazy. They would take Christians and they would impale them and light their bodies on fire and essentially use them as street lights and impale them by the streets. It was as bad of a situation as it gets for believers. Paul's idea of renting the Colosseum and preaching wouldn't have worked. It just wouldn't have worked. He would have likely been impaled and used as a street lamp. So God's idea was different. A lot of times we think we have things all figured out, don't we? We got it all figured out. It's amazing how God stops us and either He hits pause in our life or He redirects us and we go, what is going on here? And in the end, we look back and say, oh, I see now. Because we don't see the things that God sees. He knows what you need tomorrow. You don't know what you need tomorrow. God knows what you're going to need in 3 weeks. So He can allow you to meet someone today or get into a conversation today or allow something to happen to you today that doesn't make any sense to you currently, but in 3 weeks you'll look back and say, oh, I'm kind of putting it all together now. If I wouldn't have, because God's just kind of like that. He's not bound in this time box like we are. We're bound in the present. He's not. He knows the end from the beginning. So God knows what we need a whole lot more than we do. So Paul's idea wouldn't have worked. So God said, you're going to go to Rome, Paul, but you're not going to go preach in the Colosseum. You're going to go there in chains. And you're going to sit in a prison. And there are 3 specific things that happened while Paul was in prison in Rome as a result of him being a prisoner. The first thing is, in chapter 4, a few chapters later, we'll see down the road that within 2 years of Paul being there, some of Nero's own family had become believers. Some of the royal family had become believers. Additionally, in Philippians chapter 1, verse 13, the next verse says this. I love this. It says, for everyone here, including the whole palace guard, the whole palace guard knows that I'm in chains because of Christ. Every palace guard knows about Jesus. They know my story. They've seen my sincerity and they've seen my passion for Christ. Here's why the whole palace guard knows that. I told you that Paul was chained 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, every 4 hours they would change the guard, give the guards a break. So every 4 hours, Paul had a new guard to preach to. Every 4 hours. So by the time he'd been there just a little while, the whole palace guard knew. I don't know who considered themselves captives the most. Those poor guards that were chained to him. I mean, they didn't have earbuds to stick in their ear and just turn iTunes on and trying to tune him out. They had to sit there and listen to him preach and tell them about Jesus and tell them about the resurrection. Hour after hour after hour. So the whole palace guard knew. Paul had access to high-level players in Nero's court due to his status as a prisoner. God said, you want to just go preach in the Colosseum where they're going to take and impale you and light you on fire? My idea is a little more organic. We're going to go in kind of a grassroots way. We're gonna work on the best of the best in the army of Nero. So the whole palace guard knew about Jesus. Second significant thing that happened while Paul was in prison in Rome is that he wrote a big bulk of the New Testament. Yeah, your Bible. He wrote a lot of those letters in the New Testament while he was imprisoned in Rome. God's like, I want to turn around what looks to be bad, and I'm going to make something pretty significant out of it. Yeah, you want to go preach in a coliseum, but I got this little book that I need you to help me write. Sometimes God has to slow us down in order to get what He really wants out of us. Sometimes God has to press pause in our life in order to get us to stop and do for Him what He really needs us to do. The third significant thing that happened is that Philippians 1:14 says this, and I love this. Because of my imprisonment, Paul said, because of my imprisonment, as a direct result, many of the Christians here have gained confidence and become more bold in telling others about Christ. And that's a pretty good byproduct. That's a pretty significant event. Listen to me. God's plan is always better than yours. Always. So we need to learn to see from His perspective. Try to see the big picture. Back up. Count to 10 and say, all right, God, I don't understand what's happening right here. I don't really like my current circumstances, but what are you actually doing? What are you really doing? Seeing every problem from His viewpoint. The second habit that we're going to look, that we see Paul model here today is this. I can be happy if I never let others control my attitude. Somebody say amen. I can be happy if I never let other people, picky people control my attitude. And as Paul continues to write in this next little portion, he mentions 4 different kinds of people, some critics and comrades who were friends, but he also mentions competitors as well as conspirators. And he starts here in verse number 15, and he says this, it's true that some are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry. Jealousy and rivalry. And the Greek word for rivalry, not to get too deep, but it is eris, E-R-I-S, and that word literally means they just love to argue, or they're quarrelsome. They love to argue. Critics, people who just love controversy, and they love to argue. They love to be contentious. They love to be divisive. These people can steal your happiness if you let them control your attitude. They can be happy bandits. I have let critics steal my happiness too many times. I want everybody to like me. I'm probably like you. I just would prefer people to like me. I would prefer you not to loathe me. I would prefer you to like me. And whenever I hear criticism or people aren't happy with anything at all, it's the kind of thing that makes my stomach churn and I get upset and I can lose my joy. But the truth is, some people are just quarrelsome. Some people just are not going to be happy. They've chosen not to be happy. They've chosen to enjoy the catfights and enjoy creating controversy. And they just enjoy being quarrelsome. And notice the word jealousy in the passage, preaching out of jealousy. The truth is, most critics, their motive is almost always jealousy. Almost always jealousy. So here's a little happiness hint for you this morning, a little happiness hint. You don't need other people's approval to be happy. You don't need it. They don't have to give you permission to be happy. It's your choice. You decide how you're going to respond. You decide whether or not you are going to be happy. So he mentions critics. He mentions comrades. He goes on to say, but others preach about Christ with pure motives. They preach because they love me. They know I've been appointed to defend the good news. They're my friends. They're competitors. Those others, verse 17, do not have pure motives as they preach about Christ. They preach with selfish ambition. There's a lot of people in life. There's a lot of people that you work with. There's a lot of people that your kids go to school with. A lot of parents of kids that your kids go to school with who have selfish ambition. They are just competitors. They're all about one-upping everything. Their kid one-upping everything your kid does. Their food being a little bit better than yours. Their vacation was a little better than your vacation. Just one-upping. And competitors, people with selfish ambition to rise high, they can rob you of your happiness if you let them. Then he mentions conspirators, people with evil intent. He says, intending to make my chains more painful to me. They literally want to make it worse. They mean me harm. They are evil. So I love what Paul's attitude is about all of these people that he mentions. The very next verse, look at what Paul says about all these people. Verse 18. But that doesn't matter. Perspective, baby. Critics, conspirators, competitors, people out to get me, that does not matter. It just doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. They did a little dance on Easter, the happy dance. One point they did this right here. I don't even know what verse it was, but they did this right here. You're not going to steal my happiness. It doesn't even matter. This will be a sign to them. Or he said, whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Christ is being preached, so I'm going to be happy. I'm happy, and I'm going to continue to be happy. That's just what I'm going to do. That is my choice. In fact, 10 verses later, Paul says this, again, still speaking about people who are out to get you, people who can rob you of your happiness. He says, don't be intimidated. Philippians 1:28. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. Don't be intimidated by people. Don't let people control your attitude. Don't let people control your attitude. This will be a sign to them that they're going to be destroyed. I like that. But that you're going to be saved even by God Himself. Don't let other people control your attitude. You don't know what they said about me. It doesn't matter. But you don't know what they said about you. Oh, really? Okay, that doesn't matter either. I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm not going to let other people control my attitude. I'm not going to let other people control my attitude. Habit number 3, I can always be happy if I always trust God to work things out. Come on now. I can always be happy if I always trust God to work things out. See, here's the thing. When bad things happen to us, we have 2 choices. We can either panic or we can pray. We can either worry when bad things happen or we can worship. We can either freak out or we can believe that God is going to work it out. Work it out. This is where faith comes to the surface in our lives when bad things happen. When everything is smooth sailing, we're dancing in dandelions all the time and there's eternal sunshine. You don't have to have faith all that much. But when bad things happen, when the storm clouds roll in, when the boat starts to rock a little bit, that's whenever you find out where your faith really is. Panic or praying, worshiping or worry, freaking out or knowing that God will work it out. Listen to what Paul says. Again, just moving on in the story. Philippians 1:19, Paul says, for I know that as you pray for me and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, this will lead to my deliverance. He said, I know. I'm in prison, been snake bit, now I'm chained to a guard, even as I write, but I know something. From time to time, you got to ignore what you see and fall back on what you know. Quite often in our life, we have to ignore what our eyes see and fall back on and rest assured in what we know to be true. I know that you're praying for me. And wow, there's nothing greater than knowing you got somebody praying for me, praying for you. I grew up knowing that my mom was praying for me. She still prays for me. She called me last night and she said, son, I'm praying for you. I love that. I love having a mom that I know is praying for me. I know there's people all over this church that pray for me. I pray for you. We had prayer in this building last night, and you don't even know it, but we prayed for you, or people prayed for you in this room last night. Prayer being made. I know that as you pray for me, and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, this will lead to my deliverance. Yeah, this is what I see, but let me tell you what I know. God's taken care of me. And God is going to work this out. Verse 20 says, for I fully expect and I hope that I will never be ashamed. Not only do I know, but I'm expecting. I've got expectation. I know God's taking care of me. I know I'm in His hands. And I'm expecting good things to come of this. I will never be ashamed, but that I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ whether I live or I die. I'm anchored in what I know. Number four, I can be happy. Fourth and final point. I can be happy if I stay focused on my purpose and not my problems. I can be happy if I stay focused on my purpose and not my problems. By this time in Paul's ministry, he is an old man. And he is awaiting death, probably. He's thinking from persecution. And they've taken away his friends. They've taken away his freedom. Rome has taken away his privacy. They have this guard chained to him 24 hours a day. These are not happy times. He has no reason to be happy. But as we'll see here in just a moment, as we continue reading, they couldn't take away Paul's purpose. They could take a lot of things away, but they could not take away the purpose that he knew God had given him and God had called him to. They could not take away his ability to choose to be happy. Paul says in verse 21 of Philippians chapter 1, he says, For to me, living means living for Christ. I love that. Living means living for Christ. We're going to come back to that here in just a moment. Living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. But if I live, I can do more. Everybody say do more. Purpose. He's talking about his purpose. He's in prison. He's chained to a guard, and he's still thinking about his purpose. Not focusing on the circumstances, not focusing on the problems, but focusing on his purpose. If I live, I can do more. I'm still thinking about what I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. Verse 23, I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ. Remember, he's an older man by now, and he's in a bad situation. If I had my way, I would just go be with Christ, which would be far better for me, he says. But for your sakes, he's thinking about purpose, my purpose. It is better that I continue to live, my purpose. Because see, he had a moment, he had an experience with Jesus where he was struck blind. Paul was a persecutor of Christians, if you know the backstory. He was one who punished Christians and stood by and watched them killed. Watched them stoned, watched them killed. And as he was headed to a city to pull more Christians out into the streets and persecute them, God struck him down, struck him blind, and Jesus spoke to him. And ultimately wound up through the lengthy story presenting the gospel to him, and he completely changed his ways. And just as passionate as he was to persecute Christians, he became passionate to create Christians and to preach the gospel and to preach about the resurrection of Jesus. He had an experience, man. He knew his purpose. For your sakes, it's better that I continue to live. Verse 25 says, knowing this, I am convinced that I will remain alive so I can continue to help all of you grow purpose, and experience the joy of your faith. He's in prison. And he's thinking about giving out joy. How can you give out joy? Because he's living out some habits. He's modeling some habits for us. Specifically here, he's focusing on his purpose and not his problems. His purpose and not his problems. My purpose keeps me happy and drives me forward in the midst of problems. What a novel idea. Happiness hint number 2 before we go. The reason that most people are miserable is because they think that happiness comes from self-gratification. More salary, sex, more status in my job, in my community. Better stuff, more stuff will make me happy. That's not how it works. Self-gratification is not the way to happiness. And Paul knows that. That's why he's writing the words that he's writing. If I were doing it for me, I'd just go on and be with the Lord. But I know I'm not in this for me. I'm convinced that I will remain alive so I can continue to help all of you and help you experience joy in your faith. It's not about self-gratification, Paul says. It's about self-sacrifice, giving myself to others. Real happiness, y'all, comes from giving your life away. And until you understand that, until you get that and wrap your mind around that, you're going to have trouble being happy. As long as you're looking to self-gratify, as long as you're looking to find things that make you happy, you're going to be miserable. But when you get to the place where you understand that happiness comes from giving myself to others, giving my life to Jesus and giving myself to others, that's when you'll begin to really find true happiness. That's why we are all about serving here at NorthRock and giving you opportunities to experience joy by serving others. There is no greater joy, there is no greater fulfillment than that comes whenever you lay your head on your pillow at night knowing that you've teamed up with God today to help serve someone, to help connect someone to Him, to be that bridge to connect a lost soul to Him. No greater joy. No greater joy. So Paul said, as I close here, Paul said, for me to live as Christ. Verse 21 again. To me, living means living for Christ. If you were going to fill in the blank here in your own life, living means what? What would that be in your life? Would your life read, living means more entertainment? Living means sports? Living means new clothes? Living means more money? Living means more friends? All of these things are fine. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. But is that what you're really living for? Because if there's anything in that fill in the blank other than living means living for Christ, you're going to wrestle with joy your entire life. You're going to wrestle with true happiness and true peace your entire life. There's nothing like giving your life to Christ and then giving your life to others for the purpose of Christ. Nothing like it. Would you close your eyes? I want to pray for you this morning.